In this episode, we're going to discuss the different types of operators that we have in C++, such as logical operators, rational operators, arithmetic operators, and compound assignment operators. So without wasting any time, let's start coding. Alright, let us talk about operators, right? Firstly, arithmetic operators. These are operators that we kind of familiar with. We just need to introduce the new symbol for division and multiplication, right? But essentially they work the same way, right? So we can go ahead and create a variable z so that we can store the value of x plus y, right? And then we can go ahead and print that to the console. And you probably notice we're no longer prefixing these features with std because now we're using the namespace std, right? When you do that, there is no need for you to do that, right? Console loading the wrong variable, right? And compile. Right, as expected, we get the value 7. Let's just play around with one of the new symbols, right, and see how they work. And just go ahead and compile. Right, so they work how we expect them to work, right? 5 times 2 is 10, right? So those are arithmetic operators, right? And then when we talk about compound assignment operators, right, essentially if we wanted to increase the value or update the value of x, right, we would essentially write this x plus, if we wanted to increase it by 2, right, we would write x plus 2, right? Right. So this, what it does is that it says the value of x, 5, plus 2, and then the result of this, which is 7, is going to be assigned to the value of, to x, right? It's assigning the value of this, right, this value to x, right? So a shorter notation to do all this, we can easily just say, or rather simply say, plus. We can just put the plus in front of the assignment sign, or rather operator, right? So this essentially does the same job, right? So we can just go ahead and compile it to see the expected result, which is 7, right? Right, so we get 7 as expected, right? So those are compound assignment operators, right? It doesn't only have to be a plus, it can be a minus, it can be a multiplication, right? So let's just go ahead and test that so that we can see that it produces the expected outcome, right? So the answer is 10 as expected, right? It's essentially saying 5 times 2, right? So that's how compound assignment operators work, right? Let us talk about relational operators. So relational operators are used to compare two or more variables, right? And then they return the result of that comparison, right? It can either be true or false, right? So that's something that's already supposed to be clicking in our head, right? If something can only be true or false, we know that we're most probably going to be dealing with Boolean data types, right? So let us try and compare the value of x and y, right? So suppose we wanted to find out whether x is bigger than y, right? So we just talked about it now. We said that the value that is returned here, it's either true or false, right? So essentially what we need to do is store it under a variable, right, so that we can print it, right? But what is the name, rather what is the data type of that variable? It is a Boolean, right? It is a Boolean data type, right? So we can go ahead and say bool, can call it anything, right? So what is going to happen is it's going to evaluate this expression and say, is 5 bigger than 2, right, which is true. It's going to return a truthful value, right, and then assign it to the value of z, right? So we can just go ahead and console log, or rather console output, right? So the expected value here is true, right? Or 1 in this case, right? Which is essentially the same thing, right? Right. So we got the expected value, which is 1. All right. So the other relational operators is something that we are familiar with. The less than symbol, the greater than or equals to symbol, or the smaller than or equals to symbol, right? So the one that I want to focus on is this last two, right? So the double equal and the not equal, right? So how these two work? So firstly, the double equal, what it does is it compares two variables, right? So it compares the value of x and the value of y, right? It's basically saying that is x equals to y, right? And the reason why we use the double equals, right? It is so that we refrain from being ambiguous, because if we used this sign, right, we wouldn't know if we are assigning or we are comparing, right? So that is why we use a double, right? We use a double to compare the value of x and y, right? So let's just go ahead and compile the code, right, and see the result that we get, right? So the result that we get is 0, essentially meaning false. X is not equal to y, right? So, and then we talk about the not operator, right? The not equal operator. Essentially, what this question asks is it says that is x not equal to y, right? So essentially, is x not equal to y, and you know that the result of this is going to be true, right? Because 5 is not equal to 2, right? So let's just go ahead and just compile this and see the result that we get, right? As we can see, the result is 1, essentially meaning true, right? X is not equal to 2, right? So essentially that's how relational operators work. All right, let us talk about logical operators. So when we talk about logical operators, I would really love for us to just step away from the code and understand logical operators using truth tables, right? So let us first talk about the not or the negation operator, right? So the symbol for this is the symbol for the negation, right, or the not operator. But essentially what it does, it flips the truth value of whatever expression that you were evaluating. So suppose you were evaluating the value of x, is x bigger than 5, right? Yeah, x is x bigger than 5, right? If your value for x maybe was 10, so it is true that 10 is bigger than 5, right? So your result would be true, right? Essentially what the not operator does, it flips whatever result you had. So if your result was true, then the not operator, right, is going to be false, right? So it's the same thing with if your initial result was false, the not operator is going to make it true, right? So that's how the not or the negation operator works, right? And then we can talk about the and or the conjunction operator. This is the symbol for the and operator. So essentially how an and operator works is that suppose you were evaluating two expressions, right? So the first expression could be is x bigger than 5, right? So let's just go back to the code so that we can see the actual values, right? So suppose we're evaluating is x bigger than 5 and then x bigger than 5 or than 6 also, right? Right, suppose we were evaluating this. The result of this would be true. No, this wouldn't be true. Let me just change this value. Right. The result of this would be true. The result of this would be false, right? So how the AND operator works, right, is that it needs both values to be true, right? As soon as one is false, we call it short-circuiting. We don't even need to check. We don't even need to evaluate the other values, right? So as you can see, the truth table, right? Let us start from the bottom, right? So suppose both came out as false. We know the resulting of the two is going to be false. Suppose one came out as false, the other came out as true. The result is going to be false because, like we said, both need to be true, right? And then suppose one came out as true, the other came out as false, right? This is supposed to be false. This is just a typo, sorry, right? The resulting is going to be false, right? But if they both true, then the result of it is going to be true, right? So that's how the AND or the conjunction operator works, right? And then we talk about the OR, right? The symbol for or disjunction is the two lines, right? So how this works is essentially only one of them need to be true, right? Only one of those expressions need to be true, right? So if x is bigger than 4, like this would be bigger than 4, essentially this would be true. Even though this is false, the entire expression becomes true, right? This is another typo, sorry, right? Right, so the entire expression becomes true, right? So as we can see, let us start from the top down, right? So P was true, right? Q was true, the result is true, right? Suppose another combination we have is that the first evaluation was true, the second evaluation was false, but in this case the entire evaluation is going to be true, right? And then same thing, right? If this was false and this was true, the evaluation becomes true. But if they were both false, then the result of it is going to be false, right? So that's how the OR operator works, right? So the OR operator needs at least one to be true, right? The AND operator needs both of them to be true. And then the negation operator, how it works is that it just flips the truth value, right? So if it was true, it makes it false. If it was false, it makes it true, right? So let's just go ahead and make a few examples, right? All right, so let's just go ahead and create a boolean variable. We can call it I, right? And then we're going to ask two questions, right? So the first question that we're going to ask is x bigger than 4, right? And then we're going to say and y bigger than 4, right? Right. So the result of this is supposed to be false, right? Simply because even though x is bigger than 4, right? But y is not bigger than 4, right? That is why the result becomes false. Let's just console log this so we can just see the result. Right, as we can see, the resulting value is 0, right? Meaning false, right? So it is the opposite, not necessarily the opposite, but the difference with the OR operator is that this is going to return true because at least one of them is true, right? So let us just go ahead and show that. Right, as we can see, the value is true, right? So that is how the AND and OR operators work, right? So now I just want to show how the NOT operator works, right? So I'm just going to create another boolean, right? I'm going to call it H. So essentially, let me just go ahead and console log the value of H. So essentially what we are doing is we are asking a question, is x bigger than 4? Yes, we know that is true. X is bigger than 4. This is going to return true, 1 in our or 1 in our case, right? But with this expression, what we're saying is we're going to go bottommost on this, right? So we're going to start inside and say, is x bigger than 4, right? If x is bigger than 4, then what is returned is what is 1 or true, right? But the negation, remember what the negation does, right? If it is true, then it's going to be false. If it is false, then it's going to be true. So what is returned here, even though it's true, the negation is going to flip it and make it false, right? So the expected result is going to be true for this and false for that, right? Let's just compile and show the expected result. Right. As we can see, it's true for the first statement and false for the second statement, right? So those are operators, right? So we have come to the end of our episode. If this episode was helpful, you can go ahead and hit the like button. If you want to stay tuned to more releases, you can go ahead and subscribe. Otherwise, cheers.